All right. Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of Conversations with Corey. Today, I am very honored to be welcoming our guest, our former Flyer, Joe Watson. Joe Watson. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Joe, here he is. He is. He's not only a former NHLer, but he's also a handsome devil, just like myself. So that's why Joe and I are going to get along so well today, because we can speak the handsome talk. So right away, I wanted to say thank you, Joe, for coming on today. It's a real honor and pleasure always to talk not only to a Philadelphia sports legend, but also one that played with the Flyers, which, got to let out the secret, Joe, is my favorite team of all four teams here in Philadelphia.
Isn't that nice, Corey? I love to hear that, man. I'll tell you, good introduction right there.
Yeah. Well, mainly because it's always action, right? If you're not hitting, you're passing, you're scoring, there's always something going on. And I love that about hockey. So here we go. Let me give you a little background, everybody, on Joe Watson here today. Is so happy that he is here. So what we're looking at with Joe is, if I have all this correct, he's a left-handed defenseman who played 14 NHL seasons, mostly with the Flyers. He had one each with Boston and then the Colorado Rockies. Not the baseball team, but he was a baseball player, which we'll also get to. He was on the Flyers for the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions in the mid-'70s. He's also a two-time All-Star with the Flyers. He was born in Smithers, British Columbia. I thought Smithers was just a character on The Simpsons, Joe, but apparently it's a very rural town, a railroad town, to good know. And let's start here, Joe, with that beginning and stuff, because I read that you said that there was 800 people in the town that you grew up in. Now, on a good weekend, Joe, there's 800 people in Wegmans alone.
So, one day, that's one day, for God's sake, at Wegmans.
So let's start with there with Joe. And again, thank you for coming on the show. Let's talk about you growing up in this small rural town. Besides hockey, I know it's, there's a lot of friends that played hockey, but talk about your growing up. And I know that you were affiliated with hockey and a little bit of baseball, and let's get into that a little bit. But talk about growing up there and what avenues there really was, even though it was a very small town.
Well, you know what? I was born in 1943, and I started skating when I was 3.5 years old with my uncle Wilf.
Wow. Okay.
And I was learning to skate. He'd bring a chair out in the ice with me, and I'd push off the chair, and I thought I was going to fall. I'd grab onto the chair, and that really helped me tremendously, building a little confidence in my body, in my mind, that if I did fall, it wouldn't hurt, because it wasn't that tall or wasn't that big. So, but it gave me confidence, and then I progressed from there, and we had a hockey league. We had about 4 or 5 teams were in the hockey league from little towns around the area. And in 1950, we're playing this team, and we had a local druggist named Claude Munson was our coach. And I grabbed the puck and went through the whole team, and I scored a goal, and I come back to the bench. And Mr. Munson said, "Joey, you keep on playing like that, you'll play in the National Hockey League one of these years." And I said, "Oh, gosh, really?" Wow. And I never thought much of that statement, but I kept it in the back of my mind. And that happened 73 years ago.
Wow.
Incredible. And to this day, I still remember that. And I believe I mentioned that in the book. But in a town of where I'm from, it's a railroad town, number one there, and they had some lumbering, mining, and farming in the area. And there were about 600, maybe 700, 800 people lived in the town when I left there in 1960. I got picked up, scouted by the Boston Bruins, and they had a scout from Vancouver, and we were having the juvenile championships in Prince George, a place called Prince George, and we represented the North. So we go to this tournament. There's only 4 teams in British Columbia. We had one region, north, south, east, west, and that was it. So we represented the North. We go down there and we beat the home team, and then we have to play the finals against a team from Kamloops, British Columbia, who beat Vancouver. And I remember we got beat 6-3. And we didn't win the tournament, but after the tournament was over, we were in our dressing room getting changed, and a guy comes down and knocks on the door and introduces himself. He's a scout from the Boston Bruins organization, and he's scouting players for Western Canada, which is Estevan, Saskatchewan, the junior A team that I was getting invited to. So he said he was interested in 3 of the players, one being me and a couple other guys. Brian Collison and Butch Morse. So we ventured down to Estevan in September of 61, I guess it was. And I get down there and I find out there's 104 guys trying out for 4 positions on the team. And I says, holy mackerel. I went to the scout. I said, why'd you invite me to something like this? And he says, Joey, if I didn't think you had a chance, I wouldn't have invited you. So I got the message. I realized he believed in me and he had confidence in me to hopefully make the team. And so I said, well, I only got 4 days to catch their eyes. I got to do something that I don't normally do, and that was fisticuffs. So I got 3 or 4 fisticuffs over 4 days. I don't know if I won one of them, but you know what? There's 100 guys gone. I'm still there, Corey. I'm still there. And now they call me in to sign me to a contract, and I'm the youngest guy in the team. And they gave me $150 a month, and I couldn't believe I was getting paid to play hockey.
That's great. Well, before we get too far into that, now, one thing, just a quick subset to that story, I do remember reading that you said it wasn't about getting in the fights in those days. It was really showing those coaches that you weren't backing down. And I think you even made the quote that you weren't a quote unquote chicken shit, which I think was the most important way to impress coaches back in those days before the draft. So let me go a little backwards here, because we got to get to a story of you growing up that I just absolutely love. First and foremost, your parents had 6 children total, all boys.
Yep.
I got to believe your mom at some point was like, what the hell? Come on, God, can't you sneak a little girl in here? You're killing me. I got to believe she was going for the daughter, got 6 boys in a row, which is fine. Yeah. But you got to tell me about the time that your mother, I mean, I'm sure loved you all and it was so great, but you got to tell me the time when you were growing up in hockey and you got into a little bit of a corner scrum, or just a little blocking thing. And your mom did what?
Well, what happened was we were playing against Prince George, which is 250 miles south of Smithers, and they're a much bigger area than we were. And we're playing against. I was only 14. I'm playing against these guys are senior hockey players. I'm only 14, so I was asked to play in the hockey team. So I played left wing, and there's a guy. We're playing this game, and a guy come down, and the boards were high, but there was no glass beyond the boards, so people could reach over to grab whatever. And my mother got upset when one of the Prince George guy, his name was Marty Tahersky. He was coming down, very good.
Remember his name? That's amazing.
Yeah, and he was coming down the ice, and I was a left winger, and I went to check him, and he kind of threw me into the boards. And my mother grabbed him and says, "Don't you ever touch my son again." She grabbed him by the hair. And it was kind of embarrassing, but that's the way mother was. She was very protective of her boys, and thank God for mom.
Oh God, that's great. Well, my mom tried to give me away about 5 times, Joe. So I would love to meet your mom. I'm only kidding. My mom is great too. But that's a great story. And I was reading a lot about you growing up. So with all those brothers, I remember you said that because you were so spaced out with your brothers, it was not the traditional brother brouts, but you did have a few spats here and there. So any good stories growing up with your brothers? Was there any wrestling matches where you guys all get along well, or how did it all work?
Well, that's a great question, because my dad bought boxing gloves for us at a young age, 6 years old. And there was brother Fred and I would get in these boxing matches. Brother Steve was there, and the other 3 boys still weren't around. They weren't in this world yet. But anyway, we used to have these boxing matches between us, and oh my God Almighty, Dad wanted us to be tough, so we would have these battles between us. Oh my God, it was kind of crazy. And we had a stove, and with a stovepipe on it, and a couple times one of us would hit the other one pretty hard and knock him into the stovepipe. Next thing you know, the stovepipe would come off, and we didn't need a fire, so they'd have to put this damn thing back together. It was crazy, but that's the way it was growing up, and I grew up in an area it was 30, 40 below zero in the wintertime. And of course, you couldn't play hockey in those conditions, but we had outdoor rinks. And we would play hockey in 15, 20 degree, maybe 15 degree below zero. But beyond that, we didn't play. It was just too darn cold. And what we would do, we would have shifts. You're playing one team against another team. You have a 2-minute shift. They blow the whistle. That line would go in and warm up, and the other line would come out and play when it got so cold. but that's just the way it was.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm glad he got to your boxing because he bought you all aprons. You probably wouldn't know what your dad thought about all of you kids.
Yeah.
So that's a fantastic story. Well, that's great because that's what's so. So let's get into the next stage. Your interest in hockey. You also played baseball, and you're pretty darn good. You said in your book that you just seen there's a better path to hockey. But talk about your interest in hockey and baseball growing up, and what eventually really pushed you to hockey.
Well, I'll tell you, in 1953. My mother said, we're going to go down and visit our relatives in Bessemer, Michigan. We're taking a train, 7 days in the train. We get there. Ooh. We get there on a Saturday afternoon. It was hotter than the hinges of hell. It was in the middle of July.
Oh,
you can imagine it was hot. But we get there, and my brother, my cousin, Jimmy Reikovich, says, Joey, you want to watch a baseball game tomorrow on a little black and white television? And the Detroit Tigers are playing the old St. Louis Browns in 1953. So, and I was playing baseball at the time, but we weren't playing a lot of baseball because there wasn't that much around there, but we had teams. And, but anyway, the St. Louis Browns, do you know where they moved to next year in baseball?
I have no idea. And you're dating yourself with saying St. Louis Browns. I know that's a long time ago, Joe, but go ahead. Where'd they go?
They became the Baltimore Orioles in 1954.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I was playing senior baseball. I was younger than most of the guys that are on the team. And, I got picked up by one of the teams that knocked us out of the playoffs. It was a team from Terrace, British Columbia, which is about 135 miles north of Smithers, and they had a lot of good ball players. And they had a big logging mill there, so they brought a lot of players in. They paid them to work in the logging mill as well as play baseball.
Okay.
So we got knocked out in the Northern Championships, and I got invited to go down with the Terrace team, to Victoria, British Columbia. This is 1961 or 60. And we get down there. We're playing for the championships of British Columbia, and I had a real good a good tournament. I hit a lot of balls, hit a lot of balls a long way, and lo and behold, after the tournament, again we got knocked out in the finals. And this guy came down and introduced himself. His name was Eddie Taylor from Seattle, and he was with the Yankees. He was the Yankee scout. So he asked me if I was interested in playing baseball. I said, "Oh, there's too many Americans play baseball. I think I have a chance of making hockey more than I have baseball." So
those damn Americans, Joe.
Huh?
Those damn Americans. I hate them.
Yeah. So anyway, I told him I'm going down to Estevan, Saskatchewan to try out for a junior A hockey team. And he said, "Well, if you don't make it and you'd like to try baseball, give me a call." And he gave me his card, but I never phoned him. Didn't have to phone him because I went down there, made the team, and that was it. But anyway, it would have been a Yankees training camp, he said, in Fort Lauderdale. They had all their young players would go there for a training in the session in the spring. And, of course, I didn't take the chance. I didn't have to go because I had made the junior A hockey team. But anyway, I was being thought of if I wanted to play baseball. I had an opportunity.
Okay, well, you would have gone with the dreaded Yankees, so I wouldn't have liked you as much, Joe. That's bad. Number two, You chose the blistering cold over the nice heated Florida with girls in bikinis. So God bless you, Joe. You made some tough decisions early on, but I respect that.
Yeah.
Third and foremost, I think I would have played hockey just for the fact that you said your coach was a druggist. You kind of lost me right there. I'm like, oh my God, a coach who has access to drugs.
He owned a drugstore. He ran the local drugstore.
Right. I mean, druggist. I mean, I was kidding.
Oh, I see. Yeah. The
fact that he still had access to drugs as a drugstore, that's still always a good sign. So that's fantastic. So then you did that, and you started in there. Now, you were getting into that process you talked about because back then the NHL draft didn't start till 1963, and you were getting into hockey early on.
Well, no, the draft. Are you correct? I thought it was 1969 they started the NHL draft.
It's technically 1963. And then you reference in your book how, and I want to get to this, how Montreal had this sort of monopoly until about 1969. But the draft did first start in 1963. That was the first one they ever had. It was right before you got into the minor leagues with Boston when they signed you. So I'm guessing that's how it went, Joe, is that they came out, they scouted all these folks, and then they basically just did an invite. And then if they liked you or not, then you went to the next level. Is that pretty much how it went before the draft days?
Yeah, that's the way it was, yes. But I didn't realize that the draft started in 1963. I thought it was 1969. But in a way, what happened was when I was picked up by Boston, they signed me to a C form, the Bruins, and they gave me $1,000. And I was obligated to their organization until I was time to turn pro. And if they didn't turn me pro, somebody else could pick me up. But they turned me pro at 19 years old, and they gave me, I think it was $1,500 to turn pro. And I signed a contract with the organization. I made $3,000 that year. And I went to Minneapolis Bruins. And my coach was Harry Sinden at the time. Harry is a great coach and good hockey player. And he was very kind to me and everything else. And he took me under his wing and he helped me. He helped me a lot. We played together. He was a playing coach and he helped me a lot. I learned a lot from Harry Sinden. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, actually, postscript, so it was 1963, and the first player ever selected 1963 was Gary Monahan. I don't know if you know him, but he was the first.
Well, yeah, I remember Gary Monahan, sure. I think he played with Montreal, did he not?
He did, and he was the first ever picked by Montreal, so that's how it went. So, yeah.
Okay.
Let's get into that a little bit because that was an interesting note in your book that basically you said if anyone wonders why the Canadians had the best teams back then, it's because they had a monopoly on the best young talent up to and a little past the draft. Why was that so designated to Montreal that they got access to all these great young kids?
Well, you know what? They had access to the players in Quebec and I think out east, like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Toronto had access to all the players west of Toronto, which, is Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and so on and so forth. And if you didn't sign these players, then other teams had a chance to get them. But Gordie Howe, look at Gordie Howe. Nobody picked him up. Of course, there was no draft at the time, but he got picked up by Detroit. But Toronto had access to the people in Ontario and western part of Canada, and Montreal had access to all the players in Canada east of Quebec. And that's why they were powerhouses in the league for years.
Exactly. That seems it's so tilted and slanted for Canada to be winning all that stuff, where America, even with the expansion, just had very little access to these great young players. So that's an interesting postscript. So you started out with the Boston Bruins. When you first played, so you talk about your transition from the minors there, but you were only the 14th player from British Columbia to even play one NHL game, which is an amazing statistic. But talk about that call up. So why were you called up, and talk about your first game ever against the Red Wings, who you beat 5-3.
Yeah. You know what? In 1965, Boston had a few injuries.
Okay.
And I was called up to play in the game. I was playing in Minneapolis. I was called up to play 4 games. And you're right. The first game I ever played was against my team. They were my favorite team, the Red Wings.
Oh,
and Red Kelly was
a Canadian?
Yeah. And Red Kelly was my favorite player. And he was a defenseman for the Red Wings. And he was the first guy ever to score 20 goals as a defenseman in the National Hockey League.
Oh, that's great.
Kelly, the first player to score 20 goals in his career as a defenseman in the National League. He was with the Red Wings. And Red Wings had a real good team that time. But I remember, going to Detroit and playing the game. And I remember after the game, there's a guy named Gary Bergman. He was a defenseman for the Red Wings, a very good defenseman for the Red Wings. And after the game, I was in the lobby there waiting for some of our players to come. And then this guy comes up and introduced himself. And he says, "Joe Watts." I says, "Yeah." He says, "I'm Gary Bergman." I know who you are. and he says, "I want to congratulate you. You did a great job out there tonight." And it was so nice to hear something from a player. He was an all-star for a few years and everything else. Gary Bergman. He said those nice things to me. I never forgot that.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's a fantastic story, and I want to get into one that's even better. So you were called up, and by the way, so cool that you met Will Chamberlain. I'm sure that's a story in itself, but I think that was great. You mentioned that in your book, which was fantastic. You said the tallest guy you ever met.
Yeah, that's true.
Which would say the least for being a Canadian. Absolutely.
And he had the biggest hand I ever shook too. Holy God! Oh, down in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's get to your first goal ever. And it was a low wrister. And I know you talked about how that was always good to have a low wrister, but also talk about, again, your budding relationship at this point with Bobby Orr, which I think is a fantastic story. So get to your first goal, your first real experience, and then your Bobby Orr relationship.
Well, I met Bobby Orr in 1965 in training camp in London, Ontario. That's where Boston had their training camp. So I was introduced to him. I says, "How the hell can he be a hockey player?" He's only about 135 or 40 pounds. And I said, I can't believe this. So anyway, so we have camp and everything else, and we break camp, and I go back to Minneapolis, and he goes to Oshawa. That was his junior A team at the time, playing for Oshawa Generals. And in a way, he bought a rowing machine. Corey, he bought a rowing machine. He rowed for about 4 or 5 months on a rowing machine for about 2 hours a day. He said not every day, but every other day. And when I met him in training camp in 1966, he was 190 pounds.
What?
He put on 55 pounds of muscle.
Oh,
I
my
couldn't believe
God.
he was the same guy. I couldn't believe he was the same guy.
Wow.
And he was so muscular. Orr was so muscular and everything else. And you ever watch hockey players, their hands are up here, Corey, to stick handle.
Right.
And their hands are down here to pass.
Right.
And your hands are down here to shoot. Well, Orr always had his hands in the stick handling or the passing position. So you never know if he's going to shoot or pass. So he confused a lot of goalies by his position of his hands.
Wow.
When goalies would look to see where the hands are on the stick, he said, "Oh, that means he's going to pass. He's not going to shoot." Well, lo and behold, he would shoot the puck from that position there, his hands. He was so strong in his forearms that he could just rifle the puck. It was incredible how, for an 18-year-old kid, what he could do. And he was the best player in the league at the time. My God, there was other great players in the league, but at the time, he was the best player that came along. And there was, to me, he was as good a player as there ever was in the National Hockey League. I know there's a lot of great players now, which they are really good and everything else, but Orr revolutionized the game of defense for a hockey player.
Yeah, was that very innovative, Joe, that he decided to make sure he could disguise his hands? Was everybody not doing it at that time? Was he really the first person?
No, guys didn't do it because they weren't strong enough in their forearms and your hands. You have to be strong to do something like that. Okay. But he was so powerful in his hands and his wrists and his forearms. You know, he was a very muscular guy. I mean, and he could just let her rip, man. Oh my God. That's why he got so many goals. And he won the scoring 2 different times in his career in the National Hockey League as a defenseman.
Okay. All right.
Which is unheard of. You know?
Well, I have very strong forearms, Joe. But that's a whole different story for another show that we won't do today. But that's a whole different thing, Joe. So now let me get to, and that's great. That is really fantastic because I know you spoke very well of Bobby, who really seemed to take a shine to you as well, as much as you did to him.
Yeah, we had
But then talk about you're playing with Boston. You're feeling really good. You had your first season with them. Then you get the shock of your lifetime. You didn't even know this till somebody told you that you were not protected by Boston, which is amazing because now they still have it now a little bit too with Seattle when they were expansion. There's protected and non-protected, but you were not protected. You get selected by the Flyers. Yep. Talk about that first, and then talk about that great story of you coming over the bridge into Philadelphia, and the first thing you saw, the chop shop. I need to get both of those stories. So give us your emotions when you first selected, and you found out, and then you moved to Philadelphia.
Well, you know what? I was, you know, when you play in the National Hockey, you're not making a lot of money, so that means you need a job in the summertime. So I was flagging traffic for the BC highways, and about 10 after 7, a guy come by, and in the morning, he said, "I just heard your name in radio." I said, "Oh yeah, what'd you hear?" He says, "You just got drafted by Philadelphia." He says, "What? Philadelphia?" I had no idea I was available because those days you don't have computers, you know, you have phones, but
right.
Nobody made me aware of it. They sent me a telegram, and I got the telegram the next day. I live in such a remote area that I was available. Which I didn't know.
Right.
And then anyway, so I talked to Harry Sinnen, who was our coach at the time, and he said, "Joe, we never thought you'd be the first player that we lost. We thought we'd lose a couple other guys that we would protect you, but you were taken in the first player, and then we tried to get you back, but Philadelphia wanted so much." And so I said, "Okay, fine." So anyway, we had a nice conversation, and I talked to Bobby about it. He was disappointed, and I was disappointed, but it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me coming to Philadelphia. And then we had training camp our first year up in Quebec City, and so we have training camp for 6 weeks. We fly down to Philadelphia, and I'm very inquisitive. I sit in the front of the bus, right in the front of the bus, and the bus driver, we're coming over the old Penrose Avenue Bridge.
Right.
And we get down the bottom of it, and I looked over the right-hand side. I says, "Holy Christ." I says, "What's that machine doing?" The bus driver said, "Oh," he says, "the Mafia owned that." I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." And he says, yeah, when they get rid of people, they put them in the cars and they grind the bodies together. I thought he was kidding. He said, no, I'm serious. He was serious. I said, holy mackerel. But anyway,
that's a welcome to moment in Philadelphia, right?
The mayor of Philadelphia at the time was James Tate, and he wanted to have a parade in Philadelphia, welcome the Flyers. So we started going down Broad Street. Hell, there were more people in the parade than were watching the parade on down Broad Street. I said, we're not going to be here very long, I said. And but lo and behold, we stuck it out, and it turned out to be the greatest thing, one of the greatest things ever happened, winning a Stanley Cup, obviously, and having a family and being married. But I never forget 4 years or 7 years later when we win the cup, the mayor is Rizzo. And we had 2 million people at our parade, and so when we went to the chambers, like in the city hall chambers, and I got up and I said, where in the hell was the mayor 7 years ago when we came here, and he didn't even show up our function? And he says, oh, don't blame me. I wasn't the mayor. Frank Rizzo was apologizing to us.
Oh, that's great.
But the first year we lost the roof in the Spectrum, Corey. And,
correct. I read about that. Yep.
We were the last 20 games. We were like vagabonds. We were playing all over the country, basically in the eastern part of the country, and we have no money. Mr. Snyder had no money coming, no advertising, and he says, I'm not going to be able to keep this franchise going if I don't get an infusion of money. So we went to 5 banks in Philadelphia, and they all turned them down with the exception of the last one. And Mr. Snyder went, and the gentleman, this guy's name was Bill Bear, and Gerard Trust. He ran the Gerard Trust loan department. He was a hockey fan from Boston, and he played at Harvard, and he was a season ticket holder. And Mr. Snyder told him his story, and he said, listen, you'll have $2 million in your account tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Ed gets up at 8, goes to the bank and sees there's $2 million in account, and rest is history.
No kidding.
That's history. That's how it happened. If that hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today right now. It's true.
Very true. So let's talk about your first couple of seasons. So you got to the Flyers, first couple of seasons there. Talk about how you saw this team kind of come together even before Fred Shero. Did you see any early inklings, even as a young team with the roof off and playing all over, but you saw there was a good draft that came in? Did you think you saw this Stanley Cup together, like you really could compete with other teams, especially starting to gel in front of Bernie?
Well, you know what? We got Bernie, and Bernie was drafted like I was. He was from Boston too, and Bernie was here for 2 or 3 years. Then they traded him away. Then they bought him back in '73. But we were a very defensive-minded team, and Keith Allen was our coach. And we played good defense. In fact, we beat every team in the National Hockey League that year, especially the existing teams. We beat all the 6 teams in the league, and we were very, like I say, we were very defensive-minded, and that was Keith Allen's style. But when they went and drafted Bobby Clarke, I think in 1969,
yes,
and being the leader he was and everything else, and being the person he was, and he was a diabetic, and he used to shoot himself up every day with his stuff, and I could not believe it that he do that, and then talking to him, he says, yeah, I need the energy. That's what he'd have to do. But he had great leadership, and he wasn't that big, but he was tough. He was tough, man. He played tough, even though he wasn't that big. And that was the start of the Broad Street Bullies. When we got beat by St. Louis in 1968 in the playoffs, and they beat us up physically, Mr. Snyder vowed this would never happen to a Flyers team again. So he instructed his coach, general manager, to get guys that were tough, and could play hockey. So they went out and drafted a guy named Bob Kelly the first year. Then they drafted Schultz, and they traded for Andre Dupont. We already had Ed Van Imp and Barry Ashby, who were strong guys and big guys that could handle themselves. But that was that was the start of the Broad Street Bullies in 1960, 68, 69 season, and then it just materialized from there. And then 72, we became a very physical, tough team to play against. And I think intimidation is all part of sports, especially in hockey. You can intimidate the opposition, and we won because we were tough, and we were very physical, It was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Literally sometimes, right?
That was the mentality of our team: an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, man. May the best man win, and that was our. That was something we lived by. It really
yeah.
did.
And I love your quote about going backwards a little bit about Bobby Clarke and his leadership. And I love your quote here. It says, leadership isn't about style of communication. A leader is someone who knows the way, shows the way, and goes the way.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, I thought that was a wonderful way to describe Bobby, because as an older generation, I really started getting into the Flyers in the mid 80s. I kind of missed that whole generation going through there. But I thought that was a great way to describe for younger fans how they really saw Bobby Clarke back in the day and what a leadership was, because you mentioned how he wasn't a big talker. He mostly just led by example. And when he spoke, everybody listened.
You're absolutely right. Yes. And he was, when you look at him, you know what? I want to take you back to 1972. They had the Canada-Russia series. The Russians were over here. And they played an 8-game series, 4 games in Canada and 4 games in Russia. And Clarke was asked to play in the team. He was a centerman. So the Russians come over here, beat Canada 3 out of 4 times. And now they have to go to Russia. And Harry Sinnen was the coach. And he come to the dressing room before the series started in Moscow. And he says, if somebody doesn't get Karmelov, we're not going to win this series. And Clarke, being a 22, 23-year-old kid, he says, I will take care of him. Well, in a way, about the 8-minute mark of the first period in Moscow, he takes a stick and whacks him right over the ankle. He breaks his ankle, so he can't play. Karmelov can't play. So Canada win that series. They won that series. And I remember talking to Harry Sinden a number of times. He said, if Clarke hadn't done that, I don't think we would have won the series. And that's the leadership, Clarke. That's the leader Clarke was.
That's
incredible. He took it upon himself to do what he did. I know that's just the way he was, man. He was a fierce little guy. Wasn't that big, but man, he was a tough rascal.
That might have been the first ever known bounty, as Buddy Ryan would have called it, the bounty on getting the Russian out of the game. So good for Bobby to start that whole thing. All right, good stuff. Let me get to the next one, because there is one that I have to sneak in this little story before we get to the Cup. And I really want to get your emotions from that time of when you really built this great championship. I just thought that I have to talk about this because Fred Shero now is coaching you. Let me start here first. You said Fred Shero really kind of changed your career. So let's get that before we get to the Cup. What impressed you the most right out of the gate? And did you follow the Shero Bible, as it were?
Well, I knew Freddie. I didn't really know him, but he coached in the Center of Professional Hockey League my first years of pros. He was in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was with Minneapolis. Of course, there was a rivalry, only 10 miles difference between the two cities. And I got to know Freddie not really well, but I got to know him. There's a guy named Marcel Pelche who was a goalie for the Rangers, and I got to know Marcel well. And even though he was the opposition, he was a fun guy. And but Freddie was a guy that he was ahead of his time. He'd give you a style to play, and he wanted you to adhere by it. You gotta play the style that I want you to play if you want to play. And he more or less said that, listen, this is the way we're going to win, not the way we're going to play. And I remember very well, distinctly, what he said when we beat Boston in the Stanley Cup Finals in '74. He said, "This is the way we're going to win, and not the way we're going to play them, because playing doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win." But he says when he says this is the way we're going to win, and boy, we took that to heart. We believed him and everything else, and of course, the rest is history. We were the first expansion team, the earliest expansion team to ever win a championship.
Yeah, I saw that. And it's great how he really changed. He had the Shero Bible, and he had only 2 rules: that the coach was always right, and if you think the coach is wrong, refer to rule number 1. Right? So that was great. But I got to ask you about this, because this is before the Stanley Cup, but I have to ask you about this because this is certainly interesting. Fred Shero sent a letter to the wives, according to you. And it was I'll let people read your book, because I think that will be intriguing for them to read that. So I'll let them read it.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you personally. So this is where I got to go a little deeper with you, Joe. So Were there any guys that, I mean, you said there was a little resistance from the wives when they read this, but was there anything, because this is back in the 70s, where guys like, this is a great letter. Oh, this is the way it should be.
Right.
Was there kind of like joking about it, or do you think they were serious, or did Fred really, I know you said he was a little bit, tongue in cheek about it, but I really wonder, because of the 70s, was this something that was really seen that they needed to get the players really in that state of mind, or what were your thoughts?
I think Freddie said that you got a happy wife, you got a happy family, a happy household,
Right?
And so he went to Myrna Snyder, who Ed Snyder's wife, and he says, you got to keep the women happy. When we go on these long trips, you make sure you take them out or take them shopping or whatever, to keep them happy. But that was Freddie. Freddie went to, he told Mr. Snyder that that's the way to keep the wives happy, and happy household. Take them shopping, spend a few dollars on them and everything else, and go out and have lunch and supper and all this other stuff. But that was Freddie. That was Freddie. And
Okay.
I never heard that before in my life, for God's sake, when he came up with that. Said, you got to, if you want to keep the team and the wives happy, you got to take them out, entertain them. And that's what the Snyder family did very well.
I mean, I got to tell you, you take me shopping to dinner, all that stuff, you're going to keep me happy, Joe. So I don't know why Fred's down, and just for the wives, that's going to keep me happy. But that's a great story. So now let's take that next step. So talk to me about, let's do the whole transition from right before the Cup, as you see these things building through the Cup and at the end. Talk about your emotions, how you saw the team. What was the locker room like? I mean, give us an insight into that locker room. Was the companionship there? Was the chemistry there? Because a lot of what they talk about, Joe, these days is it's not really just the talent. It's that when that team comes together emotionally, physically, all that kind of stuff, where they're really together as a group. Did you see that as the locker room and that the impetus to doing it, or was there other things that you saw?
No, you know what? In 1973, we played Montreal in the playoffs. We beat Minnesota, and then we had to go up against Montreal. Montreal won the Cup that year. But anyway, we went up against them, and every game was so close, but we got beat. And after the series, we're in Montreal, and Clarke says, I want the trainers out of here. I want the coaches out of here. I want to have a meeting with the players.
Okay.
And he says, boys, we're not that far off. Look what we did to Montreal, and they're probably going to win the Stanley Cup, which they did. And he said, we're not that far off, boys. If we take good care of ourselves, really train hard this summer, and come back to camp and be in good shape, and we get off to a good start. And Clarke was right. Clarke was right, man. We came back to training camp. We were gung-ho and everything else. And we started out very strongly and never looked back. And the rest is history. I mean, but Clarke hadn't had that meeting in Montreal after our last game in Montreal. I don't know what would have happened. But he saw something on the team that a lot of people didn't see, probably. But he thought we were close. And we were close because Montreal was a hell of a team. And if we had had good goaltending, the series would have went further. But we had a guy named Doug Favell, was a goalie. Yes. He was a goalie, good goalie in his own right, but he wasn't a Bernie. And that's when the Flyers decided, after that series when we lost Montreal, the Flyers decided to go out and get Bernie. They got Bernie back, and they bought a guy in they bought in a coach named Jacques Plante, who was one of the best goalies in all of hockey. He played for Montreal. He won about 10 Stanley Cups with Montreal. Woo. He was an angle goaltender. And the Flyers hired him to coach Bernie to help him learn his angles. So he would bring ropes out during practice, and Bernie wasn't allowed to go outside those ropes. If he went outside those ropes, that means he was off angle. He didn't have the shot. He wouldn't have the shot covered. So that means that Bernie had to stay in those little ropes and everything else. And Bernie was a hell of an angle goaltender. He learned that from Jacques Plante.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I guess that was sort of innovative at the time. That
it was. I'd never seen that before. No,
that's great. So then you got Bernie, and it was that very next year, 73, 74, you won the first Cup, right? So how did you see that season progressing? Was there anything that was different than 72, 73?
Well, we believed in ourselves. There was a big difference. We believed in ourselves. We believed we were good enough to play against the big boys.
Okay.
And we believed that, and Coach Shero made us the believers, and so did our captain, Bob Clarke. He says, we're good enough to beat these guys. And So anyway, now we play the Rangers, and this is the semifinals in '74. We won our first cup, and we beat them in 7 games. And the Rangers are the best team in the league that year. I thought they were the best team, but it was a very physical series, and we won our last game in Philadelphia 4-3. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and we had to go to Boston to open up on Tuesday. And Boston had beat Chicago in 5 games, so they had 6-7 days off, and they were preparing for the Rangers, not the Flyers.
Wow!
And so we go to Boston on a Monday afternoon, and I pick up a Boston Globe, and the headlines were, "This is anticlimactic. We just beat a better team that gets the finals, that we're going to play for the finals of Stanley Cup." And I looked, I says, "Who the hell made that statement?" I looked, it was Freddie Shero. I says, "Freddie, what the hell are you talking about? We haven't beaten Boston in 7 years." He says, "I know that. We haven't beat them in their building. You're right, we haven't. But this is what we're going to do. We're not going to show any respect." And the unwritten rule was never shoot the puck in Orr's corner, could never let them touch it. Don't let them touch it. Well, Freddie says, "We're going to change that strategy around. We're going to shoot the puck in his corner. The buildings are hot. We're going to wear him down. Every time he touches the puck, we're going to get in his way, make him exert some energy." And Orr had great balance, and great skater. Holy mackerel! But anyway, Freddie was absolutely right, because he dominated for the first 3.5 or 4 games, and he was tired. The 5th and 6th games, he was tired because he's playing 35 to 40 minutes a game, and like I mentioned, the buildings were hot, going to wear you out, and we kind of wore him out. And I remember talking to him after we won the Stanley Cup, and we were talking, and he says, "You know, you guys wore me down." He says, "Well, that was the ploy, to shoot the puck in your corner, make you go back and get it, and try to wear you out, tire you out." And it worked. It really worked. And but that was Freddie's idea. And Freddie says, "Boys, this is the way we're going to beat them, not the way we're going to play them. This is the way we're going to beat them."
Win.
And man, he said that, man. He believed in us, and we believed in ourselves. But you know, it was. I was the last guy. If you ever watched the film there, Tori, I was the last guy to touch the puck when we won our first cup, and the puck was shot down there, and I went behind our net. It was 8 seconds to go, and I didn't touch the puck because it would have been icing anyway. But the first guy to near me was Wayne Cashman, so I touched the puck with 4 seconds to go, and the face-off would have been back in the Boston zone anyway. But what happened was, there's so much noise and pandemonium in the building that the timekeeper didn't hear the whistle. He let the clock run down to 1 second before he realized what had happened. And of course, it was over with. And people and the glass, Corey, the glass wasn't that high then, though people come right over the boards and got in the ice. And so we never really had a chance to go around the ice with the Stanley Cup to show our fans, because all these people were on the ice. But anyway, it was enjoyable. It's funny, you know, I'm telling this story because I met some of the people that came on the ice later on in my career and everything else. And the people I remember being on the ice with you guys and everything else. We could not believe it. This happened to one of our teams winning the Stanley Cup or winning a trophy or whatever, you know. So it was quite an adventure. It really was. And then the second year, we were cocky and good enough that we knew we were going to win. So we won. And then the third year, we went against Montreal. And we didn't have Bernie, or we didn't have McLeish. McLeish used to score a lot of goals on Montreal, but we didn't have him for the whole playoffs. We didn't have Bernie for the whole playoffs. Wow. So we got beat by Montreal, and oh boy, that was depressing. Oh my God, because I think if we could have had those 2 players, it would have won 7 games. But every game we lost that year to Montreal in the finals by 1 goal.
Oh.
1 goal. Oh.
Well, it's amazing that there's so many firsts, because going back to the first cup, how Fred Shero gave him the quote unquote, which you call it, but you say today, the bulletin board material.
Yeah.
The fact that he said we already
together forever. You're right. Yeah, it's true.
Never heard of that. And that's amazing.
And that was Freddie. That was Freddie again. You know, I mean, Freddie just innovated so many things. He innovated morning practices, morning skates, a system. He talked about a system. There's so many things Freddie innovated in the game that he never really got credit for, you know. But he created these before anybody else did. Yeah. But Freddie, you know, Corey, he went to Russia. After we won our first cup, he went to Russia, and he had meetings with the Russians, and he got to know Tarasov, the big Russian coach. He went over there 2 years in a row to learn his system and all this other stuff. But when we played the Russians in '76, he says, we're going to show them the Iron Curtain in America. They have the Iron Curtain over there. We're going to show them the Iron Curtain here. And Freddie was right.
And that's where we got the famous quote. that I still love today that Fred Shero joked that when you scored a shorthanded goal that you had set Russian hockey back 25 years.
There's another story going. You're right. I never scored a lot of goals, and especially shorthanded.
Right.
I mean, I did a lot of killing. I killed a lot of penalties. But what happened when we were playing the Russians in '76? They were making a line change, and they were taking their time in the line change. Oh, well, hell, I'm just going to saunter up the ice with Selesky and Kinnerchuk. And Kinnerchuk takes the shot. Tretiak makes a save. He keeps it nice and low so he can't control it with his glove. Keeps it nice and low, and he shoots in his pads, and the puck bounced out off his pads. And I happen to be, skating in the area, and I happen to slap it between his legs and into the net. And there's one thing I proved, Corey. When I scored that goal, I thought a white man could jump. I proved white man can't jump. I jumped 3 inches, and that was off. When I looked at the film, I said, "Holy Christ! I never jumped that high."
That's a great story, Joe. Yeah. So to take a quick turn of this before we get into the latter part of your career and unfortunately what happened in Colorado, but 2 things happened. First, we got to get to the criminal aspect. So your arrest up in Canada and the easy way you got out of it. So talk about what led to all that. Obviously, the interaction, of course, and then what I saw the ending of that in court, which was great news to you. But talk about that little arc of the story.
Well, you know what, we were playing Toronto in the playoffs, so we're not well. It doesn't matter where we went in Canada, we were not well liked. But every time we played, every building was sold out. Everybody wanted to see the Broad Street Bullies.
Right.
You're going to get your money's worth, whether they're right or wrong, but you're going to get your money's worth. So we were in the second period in a game in Toronto in the playoffs, and we were getting the royal end of the shaft. The goddamn referee was calling so many penalties against us, and Toronto had all these power plays. So I was in the penalty box, and I got things thrown at me because there was no protection in the old Maple Leaf Garden.
Yep.
So there was no protection, so people could throw things at you, yell at you, and all this other stuff. And so anyway, I got out of the penalty box. I go back to the bench, and about a minute later, Don Selesky ends up in the penalty box. And the play stops. I see something going on over the penalty box. I said, "The hell with this!" So I jumped over the boards. I had my stick in a lariat. I had my stick in a lariat like this, and I was going to hit this fan because the fan was throwing these things at Selesky and doing all these things he shouldn't be doing. Thank God the policeman saw what was happening. I jumped the glass. I came down with my stick with the point of the blade was pointed down on, and I was hoping to hit the guy. Well, the cop realized what was going on. He pushed the guy out of the way, and I hit the cop right in the shoulder. Thank God I hit the policeman on the shoulder. If I had hit him with my stick pointed down, hit him in the head, I would have done a lot of damage. So anyway, make a long story short, I go to, we lose the game 5-4, very upset. I go to bed early, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, I get a knock on my door, and it's the police. And I said, "Holy shoot." So the police, and so they came to arrest me. They arrested myself, Mel Bridgman, Don Selesky, and Bob Kelly. So we had to go to court at 3 in the morning, and they put us in jail till 9 in the morning. And we got out of there, and it was very, very difficult because we were in the playoffs, and this was happening. But make a long story short, they arrested us, and we had to go to court in Toronto. And there was a guy named Roy McMurtry. I think he was trying to get elected again, so he really wanted to, we were not well liked, so I guess he thought he'd get a lot of votes. A lot of votes from people that didn't like the Flyers, and there were hockey fans and everything else. And I don't know if he ever kept his job, but he was grandstanding. He was grandstanding for the people in Canada. He really was. But I got pictures of that. I still have pictures of that, us being arrested at 3 in the morning.
But you got out of that with only fines. You mentioned in your book, right? Yeah. That was kind of lucky that all happened.
Yeah, if I had hit the fan, it would have been a different story.
Yeah.
But my God.
That was pre-Detroit Pistons. So you would have been legendary had you gone in and really fought with fans, because that was pre-Detroit Pistons. And that was also fan jumping over to hit Ty Domi in the Spectrum, which I was at that game.
Oh, were you? Really?
I was actually present at that game, and that was the game of my life. I will forever remember that. And the guy got standing ovations. It was the best game ever. But that's interesting. Again, there's just so many, first time things that really happened through you, Joe. That's amazing to look at through your eyes of really how hockey evolved, even the fan interaction, friendship putting bulletin board, Bobby Clarke really being this amazing leader that really sparked everything. So it's a whole arc that I just never saw coming. And I really saw through your book.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I could have printed a book with 500 or 600 pages, but we had to cut it down. We had to cut it. Where I got the idea, Corey, was we went to Russia and played in Russia 6 years ago. And I took our alumni team over there, and I was the only guy that played in the game in '76 that played in Russia 6 years ago. And while we were over there, I got interviewed a lot because we went to 4 different cities, and the last city was Russia in Moscow, Red Square. And they had a game there, they had a rink there, and everything else. And but I got asked about how the Broad Street Bullies dismantled the Soviet Red Army team in 1976. That's all they wanted to talk about, because the Russians were the best team in Europe. We were the best team in North America at the time. So came down to a 1-game series. They were beating all the top teams in the National Hockey. They beat the Bruins. They beat the Rangers. They tied Montreal. They beat other teams too. And so we had to uphold the prestige of hockey in North America. And when we beat the Russians, if Tretiak, the great Russian goalie, hadn't played well that year, we would have beat him 10-1. We outshot him 49-13. And he was just an incredible goalie. He's one of the best goalies I ever played against and ever watched play hockey.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I want to take this a little bit of a tough turn here, but I certainly have to talk about it because it was part of something that, again, I think was something that was new and it wasn't really happening at that time, was dealing with Barry Ashby, who was not only a great player, but a great teammate, but a great person. And to lose him during a time frame where he was at his best and you were at your best. Talk about how the team really dealt with the news and then dealing with Barry Ashby and his illness and his untimely death.
Well, I remember distinctly that we were in the playoffs against Toronto, and Barry went to the doctor, and they did some tests on him, and we weren't aware of this. We didn't know that he was sick. And so in a way, he goes to the doctor, and they come back with these tests and told him he had, what he had, and so on and so forth. So he made an announcement before our first games against the Toronto Maple Leafs in Philadelphia in 1977, I guess it was, 76 or 77, I guess. And that he had this disease. And a month to the day that was disclosed that he had this, he had passed on.
Wow.
One month to the day. And you know what? He was a great leader, a great guy, and very quiet, big, strong guy. And but a month to the day, the medicine they have now, they can prolong this stuff for quite a while and hopefully get rid of it. But at that time it was something new, and he got this, and it was very difficult. I remember going to Toronto, and we were in the playoffs then. We were in the playoffs because we had to go up to Toronto, fly up for the burial.
Right.
And it was very, very difficult for us to see what he was going through. And so, I was the oldest guy in defense at the time because they had traded Ed Van Impe. And so I was the oldest guy in defense. So I was helping coach the defense as well as playing. So I would talk to Barry after every game and before the game and ask him what we think we should do. And he would tell me what I think we should do, and so on and so forth. And Barry's a great communicator, very quiet, but very great communicator. So we had a conversation going for about 3 weeks. And then I'd phone him up every other day or every day, every time. We'd talk 2 or 3 times a day. And I remember the last week and a half, I talked to him, and I just wasn't making any sense, the poor guy.
Oh, geez.
The things we were discussing just weren't making any sense. And I sensed something wasn't good and everything else. But a month to the day, Corey, he passed on.
That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible.
Oh, God. He was a great leader, great guy and everything else. And 37 years old. Holy mackerel.
Yep. It just seems incredible. And then you had another, obviously tragedy with Pelle Lindbergh. It just seems that the way that you dealt with it was incredible, because that's not easy to do with a guy who, again, you said is very well liked by the team. He's a great teammate, good person. And that's a tough thing to deal with. So it's nice you can give that insight. Let me get a couple other things and I'll let you go in a little bit. Talk about how your career, you get called up to say that we're trading to the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the incident with the guy who ended your career. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? So after 1978, you have your season's finished. You have a meeting with the coach and the general manager. So I go in to have a meeting with Freddie and Keith Allen, and we're talking, and they said, Joe, we want you to stay here and help us. We want you to try to develop we got to bring some young defensemen in. We're getting up in age, and the defense is getting older, and we want you to stay here and help us develop some of the defensemen. I said, well, I'm only 36. I'd like to play another season or two. Well, if you want to do that, we're going to have to trade you. I says, oh God. I says, okay. So I went home and talked to my wife at the time, and we had a discussion. And I said, I want to play. I don't want to sit around and play 35 to 40 games a year. That's no good. That's not going to do me any good.
Right.
Well, they asked me where I wanted to go, and I said, well, I'd like to go to Colorado. So I went to Colorado. They had a young team, a lot of good young players. I thought, well, I could maybe help them. And well, I went there, and I was named the captain of the team. And the 16th game, this is incredible, but our 15th game was in was in Colorado against the Flyers.
Wow.
We tied them 2-2. The next day we had to go to St. Louis, play St. Louis, and we flew in the morning to St. Louis. Normally you used to charter, but it was pretty costly to charter planes at the time, so we had to fly the day of the game. We get to St. Louis and we get to the rink, and the game starts, and 2:02 of the second period. The puck was shot into our zone. Our goalie went behind the net, put it in the goal line, wait for me to pick it up. As I stretch out to reach it, one of the St. Louis players pushed my lower back. I exploded into the boards. I broke my right leg in 13 places.
Oof.
And that was the end of my career. And I never thought it was that bad. I didn't know how bad it was. There was a guy named John D'Amico. He's a linesman. And he came to me. He says to me, Joe, you okay? I said, I don't know. He says, and he looked, he said, oh, no, keep your head down. I said, what do you mean? No, keep your head down. Well, what happened was, I didn't know this, but my bone had pierced my sock. It came sticking right out, for God's sake, out of my leg. And I didn't see it. But I looked at the people on the boards or in the glass, and they were looking, they were turning their heads. So I knew there's something wrong. But anyway, make a long story short, I had 9 operations in my right leg, and the leg was 2.5 inches shorter than the left leg for years. And I played hockey with it, and I always walked with a limp for many years. And then I went to Dr. Bartolozzi. We went to Finland and played in a tournament about 15 or 16 years ago, and we're playing 2 games a day, and my leg was really still short. I said, I can't take this pain anymore. So I come back. I go to the University of Pennsylvania, and Dr. Bartolozzi lengthened my leg, excuse me, by 2 inches, and I'm as good as new now. I'm as good as new.
You're gonna play tomorrow, Joe? You're gonna jump in there?
But I'm as good as new, and but it was crazy at the time. Holy mackerel! Yeah, I think back to those days. Oh,
and I don't like the fact that you did mention that without you were very good about it, but you just intimated, of course, that it was a dirty hit. I mean, the guy pushed you from behind. It was a dirty hit, and that he never made amends. He sent a letter to you, but he never really sent you face to face, because that really, I think, in your mind would have been, okay, at least he comes face to face and mans up. I'm okay with that, but he never did, and that to me is a disgrace.
Well, I was very upset about it, and I talked about it about 6-7 months where he wrote the letter, and I think he left his phone number, so I called him and told him, because all the St. Louis players, every one of the St. Louis players come to visit me in the hospital to see how I was. It was really nice of the St. Louis players. And it was led by Brian Sutter. He was the captain of the team, St. Louis. And he was the one that first came up, and then a bunch of the other guys came up. And it was really nice of him, but he was the only guy that didn't show up was him. I think he felt bad about it, obviously, but he could have approached it a different way. He could have come up and apologized and said things and everything else, but he didn't. And that kind of upset me. And today, at this day, it still upsets me,
Yeah, that's just terrible. So looking over a couple of things in your career, I thought it was interesting that the most goals you ever scored was in the minors with Oklahoma City. You had 8 goals. And I thought you're thinking, I could be Bobby Orr. I got 8 goals. This could be me. It's a whole new
game or 2 games. Yeah, right.
And then you had your most points, 30 points, in your third to last season. And I thought that was kind of odd. I mean, here you are, you're developing into this point machine. close to the end of your career. Was that happenstance? Was it just the way it worked out, or are you looking for more assists at that time in your career?
Well, Freddie encouraged me. You get a chance, go with a puck. I never thought it. My brother did. My brother Jim did. And my teammates say, if you get a chance, go with a puck. And I did that. I tried that one year, and I did very well doing it. And like I mentioned, I got 30 points that year. I normally got around 18 to 20 points a year, but
that
year I got 30 points, and I was somewhat surprised. But I worked at my skating all summer, and I came to camp in great shape. I started out very strong, and so it worked out well for myself. But I never envisioned me being an offensive defenseman. My primary job was taking care of our zone, and I try to do that as well as I could, and it worked out well for myself.
That's good. Yeah, and that's an interesting that you bring that up, because you were a physical defenseman, but you talk about that you never had more than 60 penalty minutes in a season, which I thought was very ironic, because if you look to your right or left, you had guys that had about 9 billion penalty minutes in a season during the Broad Street Bullies one. So how did you separate yourself from these other guys?
Well, Corey, somebody had to kill the penalties off, for God's sake, and I've been a defenseman. And I was one of the defensemen, and I guess I feel, well, I was more important to the team on the ice instead of being off the ice. So that's the way I looked at it. And I says, I got to kill these penalties. So that was the way I looked at it. It really was. But every once in a while, I'd saunter up the ice and maybe get a goal here or a point here or whatever, But the main objective was to win. Anybody can lose, but not anybody can win.
Right.
And that's what I want to do. I want to be known as a winner, not a loser. So.
That was an excellent answer, Joe. There's got to be somebody on the ice to prevent the goals while there's 43 guys in the penalty box. Might as well be you. That is about the best answer I could have hoped for.
Yeah.
And also speaking of off the ice, so Bobby Clarke called you an intense competitor, and we have Thundermouth as your book, which is a great book. Yeah. But you also had a nickname called Whispers, because you never talked. You never talked about it. It was an ironic nickname. But who gave that to you?
Whispers did Ed Van Imp.
Okay.
Whispers, that wouldn't work, because Eddie gave me Thundermouth too. He gave me the name Thundermouth.
Okay.
But Whispers wouldn't work because I was too boisterous and too loud. In fact, how I got Thundermouth was in the first few years, we only had 2 levels in the spectrum. And then when we started winning and started becoming successful, they built a 3rd level in the spectrum, And I'd hear some people, I'd meet the fans after the game and BS with them and everything else. Joe, we heard you up in the 3rd level tonight. I said, what do you mean? We heard you talking on the 3rd level. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And Ed Van Imp was there. Ed was there, and he says, we're going to call you Thundermouth now. So that's how Thundermouth came about, Corey. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. All right. I got 3 more things for you. Yeah. First and foremost, I got to start here. You talked about playing with frozen turds as pucks. I just want to say this for the record. Please don't tell me they were your frozen turds.
Oh, no.
Because that would be weird that you'd have to make your own pucks before you went out and played.
No, those are horse turds.
Okay.
And the puck cost 10 cents to buy a puck at those days. Yeah, and yet we didn't have 10 cents to buy, so we get horse turds and start firing them around and everything else. And that's the way it was. I mean, it was crazy, but we'd stick handle with these things, and then they bouncing all over the place, and as if they were pucks. And that's how you learn to stick handle sometimes with what we were talking about. And so it worked out when we shoot these things all the time. They were lighter than pucks, obviously, but we got the idea of how to shoot the puck. A coach would show us how to shoot the puck, and bring the puck from behind to the front. And you shoot off your front foot, and you follow through will determine where the puck is going, so on and so forth. But that's where that came about. Yes.
Okay. A couple more things. Again, I'll let you go. So the second to last thing is talk about, you said you now have your second career, which is over 40 years with the Flyers. How that came to be, and is this what you envisioned when you retired from hockey? Is there anything else that you looked toward, or is this just came together so nicely for you that you were able to spend a lot of your career with that thing, which is so great?
When I got traded to Colorado, Mr. Snyder called me, and we talked before I got traded, and he says, "Well, you go to Colorado, I want you to come back and work at an organization as soon as you retire." And I said, "Really?" He says, "Yes, I want you to work in an organization." I said, "Okay, I want you to do some things. You'll help the team and everything else." And so I became a scout for Pat Quinn, this band scout, and so on and so forth. But that was so nice of Mr. Snyder to offer me a job in the organization. And you know, I was only gone for 6 weeks, and I came back to the organization. So they counted the years I was with the Flyers and the organization and scouting. And then Comcast came in and bought the Flyers, and they took all my years with the Flyers, and they combined, and I was 50 some years with the Flyers. Imagine that. I was my tenure with Comcast was I was a #1 employee as far as tenure goes. Out of 195,000 employees Comcast have all over the world, I was number one in longevity. And I'm a Canadian from British Columbia, still a Canadian, but it's incredible how that happened. Yeah.
That is amazing that you've gotten to spend this much time with the organization. That is a matter. If you weren't a hockey player, I know you talk about baseball a little bit too.
Yeah.
And I know you said in your book you didn't really want to be in the lumber mill. You didn't want to be anywhere there. Was there anything else outside of those things that you saw yourself doing if you didn't do hockey, baseball, or got away from the lumber mills?
Yeah, you know what? I just felt, Corey, that I'd probably be spending the rest of my life back home, and I'd be working in a lumber mill or doing some hard labor work. I wasn't going to be a farmer. Holy God, man, that's just not for me. But a lumber mill job what I used to do in the summertime, I'd come back from finishing my hockey, playing pro, and I'd come back and go in the lumber mill and work for 3 or 4 months, pulling lumber off a green chain. And that really built my arms, my shoulders up and everything else. And but when I was 16, 17 years old, that's what I did. I worked in the lumber mill, and then I progressed from there. And I was like I mentioned earlier on, that I did some I worked for the BC Highways Department. I did flagging traffic through when we were doing some work on the roads. I was doing flagging traffic, but that wasn't hard labor. It was just very intense. Sometimes you're responsible for about 30 or 40 traffic vehicles going through the traffic, and you're in charge of this thing. And if something happened, then you're responsible. So I took that, but I didn't do it very long. I did it for 2 years. I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. So I went back working in the lumber mill, just killing 2 or 3 months at a time, and it helped me. It really helped me. It made me strong. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
But I wouldn't have done anything else, but probably lived there and the rest of my life.
Okay.
I hadn't got scouted by the Boston Bruins.
Okay. All right. Last question for you. I'm going to go ahead and just take the easy assumption that your most coveted moment and the most loved moment on the ice was the Stanley Cups. I would assume that is correct, right?
Right.
Okay. So now off the ice, taking away, obviously your family is a great moment. Working with the Flyers, great moment. But what would you say beyond those things off the ice? What was your most rewarding moments off the ice after you were done your playing career?
Oh boy, rewarding. Well, I did a lot of sports card shows, and I got to meet a lot of athletes, and I got to meet Ali, and I did a couple of shows. Yeah, Ali was there, and I got to meet him, and I always thought so much of him. And the way he could move around, the way he could box and everything else, and I got to meet a lot of great athletes, but I admired him probably as much as anybody because of what he could do and what he did, so on and so forth. And he was a funny guy. But I remember meeting him in St. Louis in 1976, the old Chase Park Plaza.
Wow!
And we were waiting for our pregame meal, and Bernie and I were sitting in the lobby at the Chase Park Plaza. And I saw these guys come up the hallway, and I looked, and I saw Don King. I looked like Don King. I said, Don King. And then I looked over, I looked in the middle. That's Ali. I said, oh my God. So Ali was living in Cherry Hill at the time, and Fraser was, when they had those fights, those memorable fights.
Sure.
And Joe Fraser was living in Philadelphia, and Ali was over in Jersey. So we went over and told him who we were, and he says, you guys are the Bullies? He says, yeah. He says, this one is for you, and this one is for you. He did that to Bernie and I thought it was so funny. And then later on in years, I was at a function, and we were signing autographs, and but he was a comical guy. He really was. He was a fun guy, man. And that's one of the things that I'll always cherish.
Oh, that's great.
And I met Wilt Chamberlain. I met a lot of people, a lot of athletes, and a lot of people in the movie business, but I cherished meeting Ali more than anybody else, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic story. And Joe, I can't thank you enough for spending time with me today here on Conversation with Corey. You got a great book out there, Thundermouth, which I think is just it's a wonderful read because it really takes you through the whole scope. And there's a couple of stories that I purposely didn't want to touch on, including the letter that Fred Shero sent to the wives, which is a must read in your book because it is so outdated and so antiquated in thoughts because of the 70s. But it's something where I think everybody should take a read. So, Joe, thank you again for your time today. And very impressive. We'll hope to have you another time just to get some quick insights. If the Flyers get to that next level, which we hope to do in the next couple of years, would love to have you back.
Well, Corey, thank you very much for your time. And if anybody's interested in the book, it's joewatsonofficial.com. That's how you get the book.
Joe, we're actually going to publish your link once we publish it out there. And I'm going to get the link from you after we're done here. So we'll send the link out and hopefully sales will go through the roof because it is one of the most interesting reads I have ever gone through.
Really, isn't that nice, Corey? That's so nice.
It really was.
Say that. That's wonderful. Yeah. We worked very hard in this book. I worked very hard. The guy named Bill Meltzer, who did the book with me, and he came to Russia with us. He wrote all these fine articles about our alumni. That's how the book came about. And he said, you have so many great stories. You should be doing a book. And I never thought much of it and my wife convinced me to do it too, so it was really nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's probably because she wants you to take her shopping and dinner like Fred Shero told you to do. So. Well, thank you, Joe. And again, anytime we'd love to have you back. And best of luck with the book. And go Flyers. I hope that hopefully next couple of years will be their years.
Yeah, you're right, Corey. Thanks very much for your time. It was really enjoyable. You really very in depth in the book, which is really nice. And I've done a lot of stories. I've done a lot of interviews, and boy, you did very, very in depth on the book. It was wonderful. Thank you.
My pleasure. It was my pleasure to read it, Joe, and it's my pleasure to learn more about you. And hopefully, we'll get you again.
All right. Thank you, my friend. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, Joe. Be good. Joe Watson, everybody. God bless you. Take care.
Yeah. The Philadelphia Phillies are 2008 World Champions of Baseball.
The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions.
Ladies and gentlemen,